Hi everyone, welcome to She Gets It. I'm Nora.
And I'm Ro, and this is a space for conversations that get you.
Because we do.
Today we have a special episode and a special guest joining the podcast. We're very excited about that. We'd like to welcome Taryn.
Welcome to the She Gets It space.
Thank you for having me.
We're very happy to have you. We appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you.
So Taryn is joining us today because it is Endometriosis Awareness Month. And
Yes,
there's been a lot of buzz around endometriosis and the space and women's health and the challenges that have been faced. And for the longest time, it's been really difficult for women to get support around endometriosis and have it actually validated by health professionals. They have been told it's just a painful period. You just get a really bad period. There's nothing more to it. I know myself, I've experienced that having endometriosis. So there's definitely a lot more awareness, a lot more funding that's gone into research, which is great. So it's definitely a topic of conversation at the moment and a really, really important one, because it does affect a majority of women. So we're really excited to be talking about it today and holding the space for it and having Taryn Darlow with us, who is a menstrual cycle educator and fertility coach.
Yes.
Taryn, do you want to talk to us a bit more about what you do and how you got into this space?
Yeah, absolutely. So in my role as a menstrual cycle coach and fertility educator, I work with women from puberty to postmenopause to help them understand their cycle, their hormones, and their fertility. Now, I am a teacher by trade, so it influences how I approach this work, because my goal is to always make the complex simple and practical. So in this case, it's about helping women understand what's actually happening in their body and why, because I think the why part is a huge part of the puzzle that's missing. And hopefully in today's conversation, I will be able to provide a lot of the why behind it. So my own journey began in this space with my own struggles as well, just like with you ladies. It's bringing things to the table because you're not getting the answers that you want. So for me, I had really bad, consistent acne, and it just was so deflating on how I felt, physically, emotionally, mentally. And I was looking for answers, and it was always the same solutions that were offered. It was go on Roaccutane or go on the pill. And something about that just didn't feel right. As like an early 20-year-old, there was something intuitive that I was like, no, this is not for me. So I ended up going down a crazy rabbit hole, as I think we all do when we're searching for answers. And that's where I came to the point of nutrition as a form of medicine. And then it was from there, the rabbit hole ended up into hormones and then cycles. And this is where all of it has sort of spiraled together and has led me into the path that I am today, where I help women understand their hormones, their cycles, and use functional approaches like hair tissue mineral analysis to help me see the bigger picture when it comes to women's health.
That's amazing. I remember when you were telling me about the hair analysis and I was like, what? You can do that? You can test your hair and find out the root cause of certain health issues like endometriosis, like PMDD. I'd never heard that before.
No, and it's such a phenomenal tool, and hopefully in our conversation today, I'll unpack what I look at, particularly in the lens of endometriosis. It's going to give us a broader picture of why this dysfunction happens in our body.
I just wanted to add to that to mention that I am really looking forward to speaking to you for a number of reasons. But one of the biggest things that I think has come up is you mentioned just then that you came from a space of teaching. Is that correct?
Yes.
Amazing. Was that through teaching like primary school or high school?
Yeah, so I'm still a primary school teacher. It's still a huge
That's
part
beautiful.
of my identity. And I believe in, you can create the life that you want. And I love teaching kids, and I hope that there will be a space for me to do this with them, particularly around puberty, because
Definitely.
I think the biggest problem that we face as women is we weren't given the right education, or we weren't given sufficient education for something that impacts our entire life. we get what, a 2 hour session when we're in grade 5, 6. Like that blows my mind. And it's only ever about here's the physical changes. You get some breast development, some pubic hair, and a period. No one's telling you about what's happening with hormones and how to actually look after yourself. Like that's the huge part too.
It really is. It really is. And I really resonate with what you mentioned there because in a previous life as well, I was also a primary school teacher and I pivoted away from teaching. But one thing that I think, like yourself, going into the space that you're also in now with the role that you have outside of teaching, I found that there's a way to be able to align learning about the self in a whole new way that you can then take that into the classroom. And then those are skills that kids can then take beyond the classroom themselves, which I think is really helpful because that way you're then not limited to what you learn in school in terms of the syllabus, right? You're actually learning quality life skills that are needed. And to the point that you mentioned, it is so accurate that when we were growing up, I think also a big contributing factor was that the fact that social media wasn't what it is now, education and learning wasn't as accessible. So creating a space and using social media to the benefit of the younger generations accessing it, being able to learn about different terms and phrases without there being a stigma around it as well, or being considered something that you shouldn't be talking about. You're too young to explore those topics. It makes it something that's more part of the day to day, which I would really hope, and maybe you do as well. I hope that going forward, that would create a whole new generation of women who grow up with an understanding of how to read their body and not to just accept the commonly stated statement of, well, periods are painful or menstruation is painful. That's just how it's supposed to be.
And it's
Instead,
just
you can be more
normal,
in tune.
you know?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
it's just a normal part of life. It's a normal experience. And also, like, I remember growing up, it was a very private thing. You know, it wasn't something that you necessarily discussed. And sometimes you might have felt a bit of shame about it. So I don't think it was openly spoken about as well for that reason. It was just like, these are the changes you need to know about your body, and that's that. Versus that whole other layer of your hormones and the emotions and the fluctuations and navigating that. So it's really wild to think that we've just been living blindly in that sense.
Yes.
Like, I know I had that experience of just navigating it blindly and just thinking, well, nobody's speaking to me about this, so this just must be normal and I have to deal with it.
And to that point as well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because it makes it seem as though your experience is a universal experience, almost as if going through becoming or transitioning rather from being a young girl to a woman in that sense, it's almost framed as being an experience that everyone goes through. There's only one thing that can happen. But to the topic of endometriosis, right? We've learnt that it's a much more common thing than what we realized before, and that everyone's experience is different. So, I guess I just also wanted to share. I know, Nora, you've mentioned that you have had your own challenges with endometriosis. And Taryn, personally, I've shared this with Nora. It's not something that I myself have experienced. So, I find it really informative to learn from people like Nora and looking forward to learning from you as well to better understand, because I think that often it can be something where we think of people learning about the topic, but equally as such, it's about women like myself who haven't had the personal experience, but who are really interested in understanding it further. So, yeah, really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, fabulous.
Let's get right into it, I guess, with the basics on Taryn. If you can just explain to us what is endometriosis for people to really sort of just have a basic understanding of what it is.
Yeah, perfect. So what I'll do is I'll explain the point of the menstrual cycle and then how that links to endometriosis because it paints a bigger picture for us. So when we have the menstrual cycle, our hormones fluctuate at different points of the cycle in order to trigger specific responses. So in the first half of the cycle, we have the proliferative stage, which is the building or growth stage, and that's when estrogen rises. And in that, the whole point is for the uterine lining to develop to prepare for pregnancy. And then after ovulation occurs, we get progesterone coming in as the dominant hormone. And this is designed to keep that tissue nice and stable. It thickens it even more, so it's really nutrient dense for that incoming baby. Remember that the body's always hoping that that's the goal, even if it's not ours, that's its biological goal. And so when that doesn't happen, the tissue will break down and we experience our period. So endometriosis is this painful condition where that tissue that is meant to be growing inside our uterus is growing outside the uterus in different parts of the body. So it commonly grows around organs that are near our reproductive system, so like our bowels and our bladder, but it really depends on person to person where it can be in the lungs, in the sinuses, in the brain, literally anywhere. And it is different for every woman around where it can be. So the symptoms are then going to be different based on where it's located. So we have a list of symptoms that we can talk about later, but where you experience them cyclically is going to give us an indication of where it is. So for example, a woman that might experience cyclical headaches could have endometrial tissue on the brain. Someone who experiences cyclical nosebleeds might have endometrial tissue in the sinuses. Those that experience cyclical pain during elimination, so bladder and bowels, that's where the tissue can be. So again, it's really dependent on where the pain is of the indication of where that tissue is growing for a woman. So because it is very much linked to the hormone fluctuation, this is why we get that pain, because it's very dependent on estrogen as the growing hormone, as well as prostaglandins as well, which is the hormone that is responsible for regulating contractions. So it's a chemical response to create the contractions during menstruation.
Just mention, I had no idea that it was in different parts of the body. The way that you explained it there, someone experiencing nosebleeds, headaches, when you mentioned initially around the organs of our bodies, I did not think that it could move so far from where our reproductive system is actually located in our body. So that is very insightful.
Yeah, which is, I think, the basic understanding that people have had of endometriosis was it just affects the reproductive organs. But I do know women who the lesions have moved up throughout their bodies and have had to have multiple surgeries because of that. It's so wild.
And so the pain that women experience in endometriosis around their body is because this tissue is not in the place that it should be. And when we menstruate, we have an exit path for the tissue. When it's somewhere else in the body, there is no exit path for it. So then what happens is we've got this tissue in the body. Our immune system is saying, hang on, there is bleeding, we need to fix it, we've got an injury. So then what happens is it sends in the immune response, which is inflammation, and then that inflammation leads to scar tissue. And over time, particularly when it's in the same place all the time, we get these adhesions that are formed and the tissues then stick together, and that's where the pain is from. So it's not necessarily from the tissue itself, it's from the scar tissue that's constantly being damaged over and over again every cycle.
And so I can assume from that, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I can assume then based on that, it means that over time, the pain then increases due to the buildup of tissue progressively, as in the pain caused would be greater over time.
It can. And again, this is where what we do to support inflammation, because I'll talk about inflammation as a way to make sure that it doesn't continue, because we can continue to support the body so it's not overloaded with pain.
Absolutely. Okay, so there's ways to be able to mitigate what is taking place, to be able to, I guess, obviously better understand our bodies, but also to be able to respond to what's actually taking place in real time as well.
Wow, great explanation. Like, I think that brings a lot more understanding to the spectrum of endometriosis.
That's a great way to word it. And especially what you mentioned there about it then having nowhere to go or to exit the body. That framing really helped me as well understand what we're talking about here, because it then puts into perspective what is actually taking place. And then to your point, further on, learning about how to be able to reduce overall like the impact or address inflammation over time. So I really like how you laid that out. And I will say, I think that your explanation really speaks to you being a teacher as well, because I sense that there's a really nice sense of linearity in how you're explaining, which Nora and I love. So thank you very much for that. Background always really helps to provide some context.
Excellent.
Yeah, definitely. So speaking on from that point, Taryn, what do you think the next thing to know is based off what you've just told us now?
I think it's important to remember, I want to go back to what you were saying, Ro, around where we don't often think that, like, we think that it's only reproductive.
Yes.
And
Yes.
this is where adenomyosis has been something that has been a term that has been coined probably more recently in the field that I've been sort of sitting in, of like, oh, this is a new word. And this is where it's that difference, where endo is anywhere in the body and adenomyosis is specifically in the uterus, but in the wrong part of the uterus. So the uterus is made of multiple layers of tissue and muscle, and that endometrial tissue grows in an inner layer. And then there's the outer tissues. So it's growing in there and around the womb space.
I love that you brought that up. I love that you brought that up. Nora and I were recently chatting about the two, and I said to her, I would love to tap into better understanding how to identify the differences between both. And you mentioned just then that it's something that has come up more recently, I would assume, in research and in conversation as well as a result of the research. Would you be able to share a little bit perhaps about how that secondary understanding came about? So endometriosis is capturing what is taking place throughout the body, but the alternative is around the reproductive system. To your knowledge, was there, what was it that prompted that development or understanding of there being two different types, I guess, or two different ways to be able to explain what's going on in the body?
I'm not sure personally if there was a specific thing, but the way that I could probably understand it is there was a point where there's a differentiation between sometimes it is just in the uterus, just in the wrong place. And then the other one, it's really differentiating that endo is outside the reproductive system and adeno is inside the reproductive system.
Okay.
Incredibly painful, but both of them have tissue where it shouldn't be.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is very, very insightful. I think, like I was saying earlier, as a female who hasn't been through this and who hasn't experienced this, better understanding how this has impacted women in my life, women that are close to me, friends and family, it's really insightful because in society, we think about a menstrual cycle on a monthly schedule, so to speak, which more or less it is. But when you then add this extra layer of how it impacts your body, which then impacts how you show up physically, mentally, socially, and everything, having these conversations will then help us to better understand how and why the women in our lives show up in life the way that they do, because there is a lot more going on biologically and internally. I could keep going on about this for a while, but back over to you, Nora.
No, all good. I guess from that point on, Taryn, would it be understanding the symptoms, the common symptoms around both of those to, I guess, know the difference, whether it's endometriosis?
And again, it's going to be very specific to the person experiencing it based on the symptoms. And we can have women who have endo and have no symptoms. So this is where it's really, really interesting and so complex as a dysfunction in our body. But the common symptoms are things like these severe and debilitating menstrual cramps. We can have pain during intercourse. We can have chronic pelvic pain, so anywhere in that abdominal area, in that where your hips are, all of that space. We've got heavy and irregular bleeding. We've got premenstrual spotting, digestive issues, so bloating, constipation, or diarrhea, or a combination of both, depending on the cycle, depending on the individual. During the menstrual phase, any pain during urination or bowel movements during your period, because again, a lot of the time that tissue is attached to the bowels and the bladder, feelings of fatigue, and in some cases, we've got fertility challenges. So between endo and adeno, it's most likely, again, because it's so complex and varies from person to person, generally the location is going to give us. So if we've got really debilitating pain just in our abdominal area, probably more likely adeno, but again, not always the case. Endo, then you've got, are there other pains around the body that I'm experiencing?
Wow, okay. So if a woman is experiencing any of these symptoms, what would the next steps be? How would she go about finding out if she has either of these conditions?
Yeah.
Question.
So there's different ways, and the common way that most people go down, and which is always the recommended path, is the medical path. So go and speak to your medical professional, and their way of diagnosing is with some sort of imaging. Typically, a transvaginal ultrasound is going to do that. And when they do that, they're going to be looking for a few things. So they're going to be looking for what's called an endometria or a chocolate cyst, which is where there's a cyst in the ovary or on the ovary that's filled with old blood. That's why it's got the chocolate name, because it's dark in color.
Okay.
Other signs they're looking for is a fixed or retroverted uterus. So it's when the uterus is tilted back, like further back, more towards the spine, and this is causing, like, it can't move as freely because of the adhesions and the scar tissue from the endometriosis. And they're also looking for a fluid sac in the space between the uterus and the rectum called the retrouterine pouch. So you don't have to have all three. You just need to sort of have one. And then the most definite way of doing it is through a laparoscopy. So that keyhole surgery that's going to give us a really clear indication of if it's there or not.
And out of curiosity, is that process, well, actually, I'll rephrase. From what you said, it sounds like that's quite a standard process for determining whether or not someone is being impacted by endometriosis. Is there an alternative way to be able to establish whether or not that is the case, or is that more or less the only way to find out?
Medically speaking, as far as I know, those are the ways to get a medical diagnosis of it.
And would you consider that because there is one way to be able to get diagnosed, which I do understand, to your point of medically there is one way to be able to establish where things are sitting, do you consider that that process can at times hinder people from receiving a formal diagnosis in terms of actually going down that path? I guess I ask because following initiating conversations with a wider scope of my female friends, a lot of them have mentioned that symptom-wise and experience-wise, they do have endometriosis, but they then haven't gone down the formal route of having a doctor tell them so, because majority of my friends and I, we're in our late 20s and 30s, so we've been going through the process of experiencing a menstrual cycle for half our lives at this point. So I guess I'm just curious if that way to be able to determine it medically, if that can deter people from receiving a formal diagnosis to, the communities that you've spoken to, or to your knowledge overall?
Absolutely. And I mean, the fact that it's surgery or a transvaginal ultrasound is quite confronting for a lot of people. And they're like,
absolutely.
What is it going to do? How is it going to benefit me if I've only got a few options of how you can help me anyway? So again, it really comes down to the individual person. Like, we know that people are quite confronted that they don't go and get pap smears done for cervical screening because it's confronting. Like, people are scared, and that's where it becomes really tricky and really layered. And then we also know that it takes 8 to 10 years to get an endometriosis diagnosis anyway. I think there's a lot of challenge in this space.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
What they need.
I know if I speak to myself, I went in to get my hormones tested. I think it was in 2019. So by that stage, I was in my early 30s. And I went in because of my PMDD. So I have premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And I came out with a diagnosis for endometriosis. So I didn't even know I had endometriosis. And that was me in my early 30s. So up until that point, with everything that I had experienced, nobody had ever spoken to me about it before, having a painful period. I was always told it's normal. It's not too much to, it's part of being a woman. It's normal. Some women have it, worse off than others. That had just been normalized my entire life. I just thought I got a crappy end of the stick. I have a painful period. I'll deal with it. So it wasn't even on my radar that I could have potentially ever had endometriosis. PMDD had always been at the forefront because of the monthly fluctuations. And I thought, you know what, I need to try and get a formal diagnosis for that.
Mm-hmm.
So part of the hormone testing was the scans and the ultrasounds. So I got the diagnosis by mistake. It just came out, but it shouldn't even be like that.
Exactly, especially at the time. I know, Taryn, you mentioned it can take obviously a lengthy period of time to be able to receive a formal diagnosis. But to Nora, your point, at the time you were in your early 30s, and I can assume, please correct me if I'm wrong, but by that point you had been experiencing your menstrual cycle for maybe more than half your life at that point.
Yeah.
So to have normalized that by that point and then to receive a diagnosis that you weren't expecting, I can imagine that that would have been really impactful in the sense that it gives you an understanding in a positive way of your body and how you're responding to changes in your hormones. But also it would be quite
Definitely.
jarring as well to have something come out of the blue and to find out this about yourself medically. Very helpful to know, of course, but still, if you didn't expect it, that can really, I guess, open up a lot of change in how you're thinking and processing things mentally month to month as well.
Yeah, and it would have been more helpful to know a decade ago, like through my high school years
Absolutely.
and my university years, because that's really when it was very debilitating for me and very difficult to, get up and out of bed and get to school or get to uni and do that exam in excruciating, debilitating pain. And that's the whole other
Absolutely.
side to this, is that as women, we're still expected to get up and get on with it, despite what our bodies go through monthly.
Absolutely, yes. And one of the things that I would love to get insights from both of you on actually is how there have been more conversations recently around how, compared to women, men, for example, experience their life on a 24-hour cycle, whereas comparatively women, it's through our menstrual cycle. So to your point, Nora, women are still expected to, well, you're going through all of this, but you're an adult, so deal with it, get up, go to work, do all the things. There's no, I guess, method in society to be able to address that as an issue and to be able to help women through what is happening to them biologically. Taryn, might you be able to speak a little bit more to that as well on the topic?
I'm very passionate about this part of the topic, which is why I am very big on helping women, regardless of how old they are, when they're coming to this knowledge, because understanding that we run on a monthly cycle, give or take, in comparison to men, we live in a patriarchal society.
We do.
Dominated by the male hormonal cycle. The fact that, thinking about happy hour, when I heard this, it blew my mind, that happy hour was created for men when they experience that crash in the day to give them a little bit of a spark to get them to the end of the day. That's how our 9 to 5 is so dictated.
I didn't know that.
I
didn't know that.
That makes me so angry.
And this is where it's like, oh my goodness, like everything that we do, our 9 to 5 work day is so much in alignment with the male hormone cycle. So men will go through exactly what we do. They'll have the ebbs and flows of testosterone and cortisol and that energy peak and trough, but it's in 24 hours. And so
Right.
when we also have that understanding of each other, because I'm very big on, we need to understand each other.
Yes. Yes. It's a mutual understanding.
Partnerships and relationships, they flow so much better when we go, oh, you're in your menstrual cycle right now, and you need some downtime. And this is where we can then support each other better. But the reality is, I don't foresee society changing and being in alignment with the female hormone cycle.
We need to make it change.
We can, absolutely. And this is where I think it can happen. But do I see it happening anytime soon? I don't. And that doesn't mean that we can't do things. And this is why I'm very big with, if we support our body in the right way at the right time, then this is how we live in alignment with our cycle. Even though our external
Yes.
world won't allow it, we can do small things that actually have a big impact. And I think that's really affirming for me, is going, we can actually do things, even though it doesn't feel like we can.
Yes.
Even though we live in a man's world, we can still do things to better align our lives and our cycles. And I think that's definitely where I'm at now. You know, I've quit my 9 to 5. I've resigned.
She's resigned. Yes.
She's resigned because she refuses to work like that anymore, in a way that literally goes against my body and just stresses out my body physically, emotionally, hormonally. I don't want to do it anymore. I actually refuse to do it anymore. Like, I'm at the point where I am really passionate about this now, and I'm just really angry that we've been living this way for so long and it's been normalized for so long, and women's health and women's bodies haven't really been factored into anything that we do on a day-to-day. It's not good enough. It's not good enough.
And I think, speaking to that point too, I'd love to hear what you two have to say about this. But one thing that I do find very, very eye-opening, for example, is, so Taryn, speaking to what you were sharing earlier, which is the reason why our bodies go through what they do is because our body is anticipating a pregnancy, right? What I find really insightful is that within society, a woman's need or a woman's right to have time off, to be given leniency, is if and when your body does accept that, and if your body, if you are pregnant, essentially, that's when your workplace and society looks at you and says, "Oh, but you're going through a lot. You're growing a human. You're going to need time off. Oh, you should do that. You should step into motherhood." Absolutely, but to the other side of things, that there's a lot of women nowadays who don't wish to grow their families, who don't wish to have children. But also, there's so many times in our life where experiencing our menstrual cycle the outcome isn't going to be pregnancy anyway. But yet, all of those times, we are, again, going back to what we were saying, we're expected to just keep going with life. So it also then speaks to the reality that the stereotype and like generalization of women being pregnant is when, okay, well, society will be lenient with you, but if you're not, you still have to go forward. And I think it's definitely still that backwards way of thinking. It's definitely a very dated ideology to have in the 21st century, especially in 2026, where these conversations are happening more. So Nora, with what you said about, being angry about where things have been sitting for so long, it's so valid, because you've had to accustom your life and the way that you show up day to day to match a society that doesn't factor in what you actually need.
Yeah, and I think for me, I might feel it a bit more than the average woman because I do have endometriosis and PMDD on top of being neurospicy. So, I deal with a lot, and I think I've had to constantly push. I've just had to be resilient because there's never been any other option. So I've had to push through it for as long as I could, despite how debilitating each of those conditions have been for me. No matter how many times I've burnt out over time. I think once this topic sort of came up over the last year, the conversations have started flowing around women's health and the hormonal cycle and the 9 to 5 and it being a man's world. It's really come to the forefront in the last year. So understanding that a little bit more and knowing where I'm at is I actually shouldn't have been forced, in a sense, to live that way. And that's why I want to move to Spain, because they're the only country in the world that's got 5 days, up to 5 days of period leave a month for women. They've incorporated now. So
that is a fantastic change, isn't it? I was thinking that, if that were Australia, it would be 5 days a year. And it's like, well, unfortunately, it happens every month. So we probably need a little bit more leniency than that.
Yeah. Exactly. But the fact that a society, a country can recognize formally that women are different to men and they have different struggles to men, and we should honor that and validate that. There's so much compassion in that. And we know that you may be struggling with these debilitating, periods that are part of being a woman. Take an extra few days.
Yes.
It made me so happy, but then it also made me so angry that by 2025, that's where we were. That only one country in the world had actually recognised that and implemented that in the workforce.
And I think this is why these conversations are so important, because it is a lack of education. Like, we just have to know from our own, experiences growing up, how little information that we had. And even then, we don't understand the scope of what we go through. Like, women do not understand the impact that it's having on our cognition, on our productivity, on our libido, on our blood. Literally every function in our body fluctuates because of our hormonal cycle. And it's really, I know it's 2026 and we feel like we should be in a different place, but this is why we need to keep having these conversations, because first of all, if women aren't aware of it, we can't advocate for ourselves. It's way
Yeah.
more than just a feeling. I look at myself now that I'm so aware of what's happening in my body, going, oh, I know what I need to schedule in my workday to be super productive because estrogen's really high. I'm going to leave those mundane copy paste jobs till next week when I'm in my luteal phase, and admin tasks are going to be the thing that I can cope with. When we learn this about ourselves, this is when we can adapt. We can still participate in the 9 to 5, but we're doing different things in bigger chunks, I suppose, or doing less of the hardest stuff. So then we're paying attention to it. And I think those conversations amongst businesses, amongst companies, amongst schools are going to be the thing that are going to make us like Spain, in a little while.
Yes. I really like what you mentioned there about how you have come to know yourself more and have been able to apply that knowledge to your professional life. I assume perhaps it also then extends to your personal life, your social life. Getting a better sense of who we are is so important, and I consider that. Something that we touched on earlier was looking at how our generation didn't start to receive this information until more recently, where we have been going through our menstrual cycle for years already, and now we're coming to understand ourselves. To your point of these conversations being important, I can again imagine that if these conversations are being had with prepubescent teens and then consistently over time as they're going through these changes, imagine how fantastic it would be to help them then understand themselves, to then align how they show up in the world, in work, in their friendships, in any other dynamic that they have based on knowing who they are. So rather than going through this phase, which I think a lot of women do, of pushing ourselves and pushing through and trying to just make sure that we're always achieving the most and we're always at our peak, actually honoring ourselves and understanding ourselves enough to the point that it's okay to have these ebbs and flows. It doesn't mean that you're not achieving something, or it doesn't mean that your workday is less productive, but rather it's actually, for example, more efficient based on where you are at in your cycle, hormonally, so on and so forth. And when you mentioned that about work, I thought about how there have been more conversations recently around women aligning their exercise regime to the stage of their cycle that they're in. Saving cardio and weightlifting for a particular point, and then opting for Pilates, yoga, low impact movements at another. And that change that has made for a lot of athletes as well in honoring their body has actually built up more strength than just trying to constantly push through, which then leads to fatigue, inflammation, and everything that falls under that category as well. So definitely, I think a really good thing for us to pivot into going forward. But Nora, I know we were going to be looking at exploring as well the root cause of endometriosis too.
Yeah, we were going to talk about what some of the root causes were, because Taryn knows a bit more about the science behind that.
Amazing. So it's really interesting because medically speaking, there's still no clear answer around why endometriosis happens. So there's a few theories that they have, and it's genetics is one of them. We've got this idea of retrograde menstruation, where it's the menstrual blood is flowing back through the fallopian tubes into the cavities. Metaplasia, which is when normal pelvic cells turn into endometrial-like tissues. And then there's other risk factors like early first periods, shorter cycles, heavy bleeding, later pregnancies, immune system dysfunction, low body weight, like alcohol consumption. So there's a lot of reasons of why they think it happens, even though they can't confirm and say, yeah, this is a definite reason. But for me, that still leaves the unanswered question of why. So why does one woman experience these but the others don't? Why does why does a woman have immune dysfunction? Why does she have heavy bleeding? The why is really important to me, and that's what I do in my work with women is we look at why it's happening, particularly at a cellular level. So we're made of cells, and our cells are the driving function of everything that we do in our body. And in order for a cell to function, we need minerals and nutrients. This is why I'm so big on food as medicine, because our minerals are the spark plug of cells, and the cells are what control everything in our body. So when I'm working with women who have endometriosis, I'm looking for a few things in, say, a hair test, which is giving us an indication of what's happening at a cellular level due to the minerals in their body. So the very first thing I want to look at is inflammation, because we know that because endometrial tissue is growing in places that it shouldn't, the immune system is in this constant state of an inflammatory response. And even though it's normal, like we need inflammation as part of an immune response, endometriosis, it's chronic, it's constant. And this is why we're getting so much pain. So on a mineral analysis, I'm looking at sodium and potassium levels, because they're giving us insight into how the body is responding to stress. And stress is a huge indicator of influencing inflammation and immune regulation in the body. So sodium, potassium, two huge elements that we need to pay attention to. Another big one that I see when working with women is their copper and zinc levels. So
Yes.
a lot of the time, women who have endometriosis, and again, it's not always, I have seen women who have low copper, but something else is happening. We see women with high copper in comparison to zinc. So we need these two levels to be balanced with each other, because wherever copper goes, estrogen goes. Wherever zinc goes, progesterone and testosterone go. So they need to be balanced, because it's all, it's an orchestra and a
Right.
harmony. They're playing
That's a
together.
really nice way to explain it. That's a really nice way to explain it in terms of it needs to be in sync. It needs to work together and be quite complementary rather than opposing one another.
That's it. Yeah, so we need both. So when we have more copper and more estrogen, it's going to contribute to more growth of the endometrial tissue, which is the problem. And then at the same time, if we have low levels of zinc, we know that zinc is really important for our immune system. And we already know that this is an issue with our immunity and inflammation. We want to make sure that we have zinc for immunity as well as bringing copper into balance. So those are two big factors. We also look at iron. We know iron's a big one. It's probably not one that I need to go into too much depth about. We know that we experience iron deficiencies, particularly with heavy bleeding, which is a big cause of that. And iron and copper, they work together in making sure that they're bioavailable, I suppose. Actually utilized properly in the body. And then we know that in terms of endometriosis being an issue of fatigue as one of the symptoms, iron deficiency creates anemia, and this can create that fatigue and that low energy. Another big partnership that I look at is calcium and magnesium. So calcium and magnesium help balance each other. Calcium is really important in hormone signaling. So it's going to help with estrogen production and activity, while magnesium comes in and helps with muscle relaxation and inflammatory responses of the prostaglandins that I mentioned earlier. So if we've got too much calcium, we're going to experience that excess amount of estrogen. And so we need magnesium to sort of come in, bring calcium down, as well as really support the pain that comes with endo, with the cramping and pain, particularly during menstruation. And then I also look at liver. The liver is, I think, one of the most underrated organs in the body, but so important. And so when I'm looking at women who do hair testing, we look at two minerals called sulfur and molybdenum. And they help the liver with the detox process. And we need our liver to be at prime condition to be able to get rid of that excess estrogen floating around the body that is causing all of that tissue. So the more we can support our liver and clear our detox pathways, the happier our hormones are going to be. And then we're going to have less of those symptoms that are so painful and debilitating for people with endometriosis. And then the final thing that I look at is presence of heavy metals. We often don't talk about heavy metals, but things like cadmium, lead, aluminium, nickel, arsenic, all of these are endocrine disruptors. So what they do is they mimic or interfere with the hormone receptors on our cells. So they kind of look like estrogen and then they take over. And this is where we then end up with this excess of estrogen. So this is why when we talk about low tox is really important, reducing plastic exposure, reducing fragrance from like perfumes, shampoos, like our beauty products are public enemy number one, in my opinion, when it comes to hormone imbalances. So that's going to do two things. It's going to reduce the presence of those heavy metals as well as support the liver to allow it to do what it does. And then finally, in part of what I do with a functional perspective, I also look at an energetic perspective as well. So, you know how with the medical diagnosis, they talk about genetics?
Yes.
We also
Yes.
have this whole thing where it's like some sort of emotional trauma is passed down, that genetic.
Oh, okay.
But when I look at it from an energetic perspective, it's a feminine wound. So if you look at what the whole point of the endometrial tissue is, it's to nurture life, right? So in the womb, it's about nurturing life. When we see tissue elsewhere in the body, it's a bit of an energetic question of where is the woman not nurturing herself? Or where has she not been nurtured by maybe mother figures in her life? So it's an issue of insufficient nurturing somewhere, whether it's your own life or whether you're stuck with that epigenetics is what we call it, where that trauma on from time to time. So unlike something like PCOS, which is, we hear a lot about PCOS and testosterone, it's a masculine wound somewhere. This is very much about where is there a feminine wound?
I find that really insightful. Yeah,
I had no
neither.
idea about that.
I find that really insightful too, because when we look at, for example, where we are generationally, so if we look at our mum's generation and then our grandmother's generation as well, if we think about all of the things that were going on at the time that impacted, for example, how they worked, how and why they got married, what their life looked like, those impacts are very generational and very time specific. We then move to a period of time where we are here as young women today, right? And with what you said about there being that influence, it really does make sense. And there's a lot of alignment there because generations immediately before us had a lifestyle that was so different to ours. The way that they lived and existed was not like what we do today. So in a way, it kind of helps us to understand why, as this conversation is becoming more prominent on like an international scale, it can help us to contextualize why our generation's experiences have perhaps been as impactful as they have, because there's been so much that's gone on and there's been a lot of unhealed and unresolved trauma on behalf of the generations before us. You know, within society, we tend to be the first generation who's looking to break the cycle, to heal, to make sure that the generations after us aren't impacted the way that perhaps we were and the women that came before us were. So I can really see that alignment there, because as the title of a book suggests, the body keeps score. And that is very true generationally as well, where the impacts of things do then translate to where we are now as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I also really liked what you said there, Taryn, about detox pathways for the body, but also something else that you were tapping into was you mentioned bioavailable forms of, you know, the vitamins and minerals that you were talking about. Would there be, obviously it's different for each person, but what would be a very general way to be able to ensure that there was a better alignment in the vitamins and minerals that you were talking about within our body to create that orchestra, to create that harmony? Would it be through supplementation? Is it best to look at it, first of all, through food specifically before then adding in that layer of supplements? Where would things sort of sit with that, with how you would generally recommend someone to go ahead with addressing a concern that's come up from the testing that you do?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because food will always be my answer. So making sure that we've got a balanced diet, it doesn't even need to be complex. As long as you're eating proteins, carbs, fiber, healthy fats, like making sure that you've got all of those, that you're eating sufficiently. But what can happen is, because our world is so fast paced, the quality of our food, even if it's quote unquote the healthy food, is not necessarily as nutrient dense as we'd hope, or as nutrient rich as it was, in our grandparents' generation, because everything is fast. There's quick turnover. It's not regenerative. So the food that we are getting that we think is healthy is not necessarily mineral rich either. So that's where supplementation can come in handy. And that's why, but I would never recommend blindly supplementing. I know we can get caught
That's smart.
we can get caught on social media, and like someone's telling me, oh, I need to have magnesium because magnesium's great. And then I'll have women who have got magnesium through the roof. And it's like, well, this is why you feel the way that you do. So it's always specific to the individual need. But the whole idea of like bioavailable is we can have so much of a certain mineral in storage in our tissue that's maybe not in our bloodstream, because bloodstream is what my body needs in this exact moment. The hair tissue is, what have I got in storage for the last 3 months, and is it being utilized properly? So if it's not being utilized properly and it's not available for use, this is where it's going to become quite tricky for the body to be able to utilize, and then we end up with imbalances. And a common cause of that is stress. So if we don't have our nervous system regulated, if we're not doing small things like eating slowly, sitting down, eating regularly, those sort of little things put our body in a state of stress. And it doesn't matter what you do, how good your food is, if your body's under stress, it's not taking in the nutrients, it's not utilizing or absorbing or clearing the nutrients as it needs, and then we end up with more chaos.
One of the things that you mentioned, Taryn, in that was looking at making sure that we're not just going to supplements first, which I think is such a smart thing, obviously, because it's so easy to think that, okay, well, if I'm having trouble sleeping, magnesium's the answer. If I'm feeling fatigued, iron's the answer. It's good to have that general knowledge, but actually knowing whether or not that's what your body needs at a given point in time is so important and imperative. But I also then like what you mentioned about food and ensuring that the food that we're eating is actually dense. Something that I think a lot of people have started to promote a lot further is looking at eating foods that are purchased from the right place, like a farmer's market, as opposed to traditional grocery stores, and ensuring that the quality of the produce that you're getting can then, to what you mentioned earlier, actually be something that is fulfilling the needs that you have for certain vitamins and minerals. Is that something that you also recommend to people that you work with?
Absolutely. And look, again, it's always personal choice, because sometimes access to a farmer's market is not possible for some people. It might be that, I'd recommend organic food, because again, that's heavy metals that are impacting our endocrine system. So it's like where you can buy organic. For me, it's like organic food isn't necessarily always available, but I've made a commitment to the 12 dirty dozens are non-negotiables for me. So spinach, tomatoes, apples, capsicums. Buy the ones that we know are really dirty pesticides wise, and then you can sort of have non-organic for the clean 15. So that's probably what I would recommend. But there's lots more that you can do beyond just that. I think nervous system regulation is a huge one. Really looking after how we manage stress, and it's not even about big stress. It's those little things, like I mentioned, in making sure that our body knows that food's coming. Even though we know it's coming, our nervous system doesn't know when you're having, yesterday you had lunch at 11, then you had it at 2, then the next day you skipped it. That's causing stress on the body. eating so fast is then telling your body, oh my gosh, there must be a million people around and I must eat all of this food because there's a deficiency of food. So I need to get it in. That's triggering a stress response. So it's little things. It's not necessarily we have to do these big, grand, regulation strategies that are going to make a huge difference. It's the small ones done consistently that are huge.
Yes. And that usually is the case with anything, isn't it? Where to build up towards something good, it's about being consistent and disciplined in what you're doing. It's all the small actions that matter most. The big actions have a great impact, but if you're not consistent and you're not focusing on the micro details, you won't then get the bigger result in the long term. So I really love that your approach is so based on the body itself and addressing the foundational needs of what's going on, because realistically at the end of the day there's no quick fix for anything. It's about actually being able to apply something and create it into a lifestyle, as opposed to it being, for example, a diet or a temporary shift or a challenge or something like that. It's actually about changing our habits and our routines and rituals over time to better align with the outcomes that we want to have long term.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I think this might be a really good segue into talking about Taryn's book, Eat with Flow, which is filled with amazing recipes to help assist with hormonal cycles and inflammation. Taryn, do you want to talk to us a bit about your book?
Please do.
So we mentioned earlier around people wanting to do things more in alignment with their cycle. And this is what the book is in terms of eating, because I don't know about you, but there's lots out there of here's some ingredients, right? Eat these during your menstrual phase, eat these during your ovulatory phase. But if you're not creative in the kitchen, how do you actually make that work? And that's what my book is. It's about these specific ingredients which have these particular minerals that are necessary for the particular hormone function at each phase, eating them at the right time, giving our body what they need so that we actually can feel good all cycle long is the goal. And the goal is you do it consistently, you're going to feel a huge impact. And because they are balanced, they've got protein, carbs, fiber, healthy fats, we're getting everything that we need at a macro level and a micro level at the time that we need it most.
I really like that the focus is timing as well, right? Because like you said, there is a lot of information around perhaps what to have, but not necessarily the quantities and the when and what you should pair it with. Because like we were saying earlier, right, it's all about the little habits and the little things that add up to the bigger result. So if you are eating the right thing in the right quantity at the right time, and it's a quality ingredient, that can then actually have an impact, as opposed to just mindlessly consuming things for the sake of it and it appearing healthy. So yeah, really, I'm really happy to hear that there's, a bigger focus on addressing concerns that women experience in the day-to-day and in every meal, so to speak, so that we can actually move forward and create change for our bodies.
Yeah, definitely. And like in a natural way too, like something so basic as just what we eat every day. Nourishing your body and healing your body through food. I mean, that just goes back through the ages, doesn't it? It's so simple.
Exactly. Like, let's not make this complex. Our bodies are already complex enough. Let's make eating for it simple.
Definitely.
I really like that. No, that's a really good way to frame it. Yeah, absolutely.
This has been an amazing chat. I think we've covered a lot of ground, a lot of context, and there's so much more that we could talk about as well. But hopefully we've provided some further understanding and clarity for the audience and spark some questions, and hopefully help some women maybe connect some dots and have taken something away from this that they can then further explore and discover to help align their, even if it's not an endometriosis, just simply menstrual health in general. It's so important, just understanding our own hormones and how they fluctuate and how we should be living day to day. Taryn, I guess before we wrap up, what would your, final takeaway be when it comes to endometriosis for the women listening out there?
So I guess the key takeaway is that just because you have endometriosis doesn't mean that you have to suffer for the rest of your life. Our body is incredible at healing when we give it what it needs. And there's lots of things that we can do at a functional level that's not just putting some medication in our body and putting a band-aid over the problem. There are actual small, simple things that we can do in our body that's going to reduce the symptoms so that endometriosis doesn't become a debilitating lifelong condition for women.
Love that take-home message. And I think too, it really then speaks to helping women understand that there is a way for us to be able to learn more about and read our bodies so that we can see where things may not be working, and that we can and do have the power, to what we were talking about earlier, to create meaningful changes in different ways so that we don't have to go through month to month these constant challenges, and we can work within what we have available to us to make an overall change as well.
Yeah, and just enhance our quality of life.
That's it.
You know, that we don't have to suffer
Absolutely.
day in, day out, you know, or
Feeling
monthly.
fit is not a privilege. It is a right. And we just need to give our body what it needs as individuals so that we can experience that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when we can give that to ourselves, it then enables us to show up in a much more full and comprehensive way in our life across all different aspects, whether it be work, family, friends, and to ourselves as well. We can then give back to ourselves in a way that allows us to show up as the best version of us as well, which then allows us to lead a life that's really aligned.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, women are amazing. All the things that we manage to do day in, day out. Yet imagine if we were better aligned with our cycles and being productive week to week in the ways that we can be. Imagine what we'd be achieving then, rather than just pushing through, you know?
Love
Taryn,
that.
thank you so much. This has been so amazing. And I know so many people are going to benefit from hearing this conversation. And we're going to put your details in the description for this episode. So your socials, which I totally love the name of your Instagram handle.
It's beautiful.
Flourish by Taryn, but like with the dot after flow. I love it. So after listening to this episode, please check out Taryn's profile and feel free to get in touch with her if there's something that you would like to explore. What is the best way for people to get in touch with you, Taryn?
Yes.
Send me a DM on Insta. That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Yes, actually, one thing I meant to mention that I absolutely loved was when I came across your profile and I followed you, you DM'd me and said, thanks for the follow. What's brought you here? And I loved that personal touch. Not many people actually do that. A lot of the time it's just about, you know, getting followers, but there's never really any personal connection. And I guess that's how we got in touch with each other and learned a bit more about each other. And then that led to this, you being a guest on the podcast.
Yes.
So thank you for that.
Yes, and we so appreciate it because exactly what Nora said, you know, often connecting with people through social media, it can feel quite transactional, but from the way that Nora has described your interactions with one another, it's been very personal and very meaningful too. And we love to connect with others who care so deeply and passionately about their craft and about what they're investing their time and their effort and energy into. And the way that you've responded to us and shown up today, it definitely speaks to that. So thank you for sharing all that you have. Thank you for doing what you do and for educating a generation of women in a whole new way. Like we said earlier, in terms of your work as a teacher, I just have to say that I think that the students that cross paths with you are in such a fortunate position because they're able to be led and guided by someone who is wanting to understand more about how the body overall works. And, you know, young people now being able to cross paths with someone like yourself, it will have a monumental impact. So you are doing a phenomenal job, and it is just fantastic to see all of the education, all of the resources, all of the knowledge that you've shared online. It's definitely helped me as someone who hasn't experienced this but is really wanting to learn to better understand the topic. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. But, you know, more than anything, just thank you for showing up. It's been a real pleasure to have you.
Thank you. This has been an amazing conversation. Much appreciated, Ro and Nora.
Thank
We
you,
appreciate
Taryn.
you. Thank you.
Hopefully we'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
There we go.
If anybody listening has any questions after today's episode, feel free to leave a comment, send an email. You know, we'd love to follow up with you. And like we said, we'll leave Taryn's details around her socials and her book in the description as well, so you can also get in touch with her.
Absolutely. Sounds like a plan.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.